I'm about to show you the #1 best way to lower your blood pressure naturally and fast, focusing on a method that works even when standard medication and diet changes have hit a wall. Most people do the right thing, but in the completely wrong sequence, trying to force their blood pressure down without first addressing the stiffness in the arteries that keeps it high. I will show you the strongest lever for rapid reduction, but only after you understand the specific setup that makes it work. Because if you skip the foundation, the results simply won't hold. I remember a man named George, who was 72 years old and prided himself on never needing to visit a doctor, until a routine insurance checkup revealed his numbers were critically high. George felt perfectly fine. He had no headaches and no dizziness, but his blood pressure was sitting dangerously at 170/95, a silent level of pressure that was slowly damaging his kidneys and straining the delicate vessels in his eyes. It is a terrifying reality for many seniors that you can feel completely normal while your body is internally struggling, and often the standard advice you get from a quick 15-minute clinic visit misses the specific lifestyle triggers that are actually spiking your numbers. Before we begin, a critical disclaimer. The information I'm sharing today is strictly for educational purposes and should not be considered medical advice. I am not your personal physician and cannot provide individualized medical guidance through this video. Never stop, start, or change any blood pressure medication without first consulting with your doctor. Arthur came to see me because he was incredibly frustrated with the standard advice to do more cardio to fix his blood pressure, as his knees and hips simply couldn't handle long sessions on a treadmill. At 68 years old, Arthur was dealing with significant arthritis, and every time he tried to jog or walk briskly for long periods to lower his pressure, he ended up in pain and stopped, causing his numbers to creep back up. He was caught in a vicious cycle where his inability to exercise was making his blood pressure worse, and his high blood pressure was making him afraid to exert himself, leaving him feeling trapped and helpless in his own body. The mistake Arthur was making, and the mistake many seniors make, is believing that the only way to get a cardiovascular benefit is through movement that leaves you out of breath and sweating. What changed for Arthur was introducing a specific type of resistance called isometric training, which involves contracting a muscle without moving the joint, a technique that is surprisingly powerful for older adults. Once Arthur began incorporating these static holds, specifically using a hand grip protocol, he saw a significant drop in his resting blood pressure within weeks without ever stressing his knees or hips. This works because when you hold a muscle contraction, like squeezing a tension ball or gripping a device, you momentarily compress the blood vessels in that area, slightly restricting flow. When you release that grip, your body responds with a powerful surge of blood flow and a release of nitric oxide, which is the body's natural vasodilator that signals your arteries to relax and widen. This flooding of nitric oxide helps to reduce the stiffness in the arterial walls, which is often the primary cause of age-related high blood pressure, and it does so without requiring you to run a marathon or jump around. To do this effectively, you need a simple hand grip device or even a firm stress ball, something that provides enough resistance that it feels challenging to squeeze but not impossible. The protocol used in many clinical studies involves squeezing the device with one hand at about 30% of your maximum effort and holding that squeeze for exactly 2 minutes. You then rest for a full minute or two, switch to the other hand, and repeat the process until you have done 2 rounds on each hand, which takes less than 15 minutes total. It is important to breathe normally while you are squeezing. Never hold your breath during the contraction, as holding your breath can cause a temporary spike in blood pressure, which is exactly what we want to avoid. You can do this while sitting in your favorite chair watching television, making it one of the most accessible interventions for anyone with mobility issues or joint pain. Recent studies have actually shown that for some individuals, this isometric hand grip training can be as effective at lowering systolic blood pressure as taking a single medication, purely by retraining the flexibility of the blood vessels. This supports steadier readings because it directly targets the endothelial function, which is the health of the inner lining of your blood vessels, helping them expand and contract more youthfully. It is a perfect starting point because it builds confidence, requires zero special clothing or gym memberships, and starts the process of lowering your baseline numbers so you are safe to do more later. If you have uncontrolled hypertension or any history of aneurysms, just check with your doctor before starting this specific squeezing pressure, but for most, it is a safe and highly effective tool. Before we move to the next item, I want to hear from you so we can see the range of numbers people are dealing with in our community. Comment your age and your usual top number range in the comments below, for example, 70 and usually 140, so we can support each other on this journey. Margaret was a 74-year-old woman who was on the verge of being prescribed a third blood pressure medication because her doctor was convinced her hypertension was resistant and dangerous. Every time she went to the clinic, her numbers were sky high, reading 160/95 or even higher, despite her taking her current pills faithfully every single morning. She was terrified of the side effects of adding another strong drug, especially since she already felt dizzy occasionally, but she felt she had no choice because the numbers on the screen were undeniable. The reality was that Margaret's blood pressure was not actually that high all the time. She was suffering from a combination of white coat syndrome and, more importantly, terrible measurement technique at home. When she measured herself in her living room, she was replicating the chaotic environment of the doctor's office, sitting on the edge of her soft sofa, chatting with her husband, and resting the cuff over a thick sweater. Once we corrected her home measurement protocol to be clinically accurate, her true resting blood pressure was actually 135/80, a number that still needed attention but certainly did not require a dangerous third medication. This is what I call the hidden spiker, because incorrect measurement is the single most common reason seniors are over-medicated or believe their lifestyle changes aren't working when they actually are. Your blood pressure is highly dynamic and sensitive. If your back is not supported, your reading can be higher by 6 to 10 points, and if your feet are dangling or your legs are crossed, you can add another 8 to 10 points easily. If you measure over a sleeve, even a thin shirt, you are introducing friction and noise that creates an inaccurate reading, and talking during the measurement can raise your systolic number by as much as 10 to 15 points. To get an accurate baseline, you must treat your home blood pressure check like a scientific experiment, creating a consistent environment every single time. Sit in a sturdy chair with a hard back, not a soft sofa where you sink in, and ensure your back is fully supported and straight, with your feet flat on the floor and uncrossed. Your arm should be resting on a table so that the cuff is at the same level as your heart. If your arm is hanging down at your side, the weight of the blood will give you a falsely high reading. You must sit in this position, in complete silence, for at least 5 minutes before you even press the start button on your machine, allowing your body to settle from the activity of the day. This settling time is non-negotiable because when you first sit down, your heart rate is still elevated from walking to the chair and your vascular tone is still adjusted for movement. Take 3 readings, spaced 1 minute apart, and ignore the very first one, as it is almost always high due to the anxiety of testing. The average of the second and third reading is your true blood pressure. If you are using a wrist monitor, I strongly suggest switching to an upper arm cuff if possible, as wrist monitors are notoriously sensitive to position and often give higher readings for seniors with stiffer arteries. By getting an accurate number, you protect yourself from taking medication you might not need, and you give yourself honest feedback on whether your diet and exercise changes are actually working. This clarity removes the fear and confusion that Margaret felt, giving you control back over your health decisions rather than being bullied by a number that might be a lie. Here is another simple habit that fits right into your day. If you are finding these tips helpful so far, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel for more senior health guidance that respects your time and intelligence. Robert, a 70-year-old retired engineer, came to me completely baffled because he had cut almost all the salt out of his diet and was eating what he described as cardboard, yet his pressure hadn't budged. He was eating boiled chicken and steamed vegetables with no seasoning, making his meals a miserable experience, and yet his readings remained stubbornly in the 145 range. Robert had fallen for the common myth that sodium is the only mineral that matters for blood pressure. ignoring the other half of the biological equation that is crucial for older adults. The mistake Robert made was focusing entirely on restriction, removing salt, without thinking about addition, specifically the addition of potassium, which is the mineral that counterbalances sodium in your body. Your kidneys work on a ratio system. They need potassium to help flush out excess sodium, and if your potassium levels are low, your body will hold on to sodium desperately, even if you are eating very little of it. For seniors, this is doubly important because as we age, our kidneys become less efficient at this balancing act, meaning we need to be even more intentional about getting enough potassium from our food. Once Robert started adding potassium-rich foods back into his diet, he was actually able to use a little bit of sea salt on his food again to make it palatable, and his blood pressure finally started to drop. Potassium works by relaxing the walls of the blood vessels, essentially acting as a natural beta blocker that lowers the tension in the system and allows blood to flow more freely. It is not about taking dangerous potassium pills, which can cause heart rhythm issues if not monitored, but about flooding your system with potassium from safe, whole food sources. Excellent sources for this include baked potatoes with the skin on, which have more potassium than bananas, as well as avocados, spinach, and yogurt, if your digestion allows dairy. Sweet potatoes and white beans are also powerhouses of this mineral, and incorporating them into your daily meals can make a drastic difference in how your body manages fluid and pressure. You should aim to have a high potassium food with every single meal, treating it as a necessary medicine that you happen to eat. However, a very important safety note here. If you have advanced kidney disease or are on certain medications like ACE inhibitors or potassium-sparing diuretics, you must talk to your doctor before increasing your potassium intake. For those individuals, the kidneys may not be able to clear the excess potassium, leading to dangerous levels in the blood, so professional guidance is essential. But for the vast majority of seniors with normal kidney function, the potassium-sodium swap is a profound lever that brings results where salt restriction alone fails. This change transforms your diet from a list of don'ts into a list of do's, which is much easier to sustain psychologically and much more effective physiologically. It allowed Robert to enjoy his meals again while seeing better numbers than he had in years, simply by understanding the chemistry of his own body. Another helpful step is to verify your medications if you are taking any, as some common painkillers like NSAIDs can cause the body to retain fluid and block the benefits of a high potassium diet. Eleanor, a 65-year-old grandmother, loved to knit and would often sit in her favorite armchair for 3 or 4 hours at a time, deeply focused on her beautiful creations. She felt she was being healthy because she ate well and didn't smoke, but she noticed that whenever she checked her blood pressure in the late afternoon, it was significantly higher than in the morning. She didn't realize that her long periods of stillness were causing blood to pool in her legs and creating a systemic stiffness in her arteries that no amount of morning medication could fully counteract. The problem for Eleanor was not that she was lazy, but that she was sedentary for unbroken blocks of time, which causes the production of nitric oxide in the blood vessels to effectively shut down. When you sit still, the blood flow slows, and the shear stress on the vessel walls decreases. This shear stress is the mechanical signal that tells your arteries to produce that relaxing gas we talked about earlier. By sitting for hours, Eleanor was essentially putting her blood vessels into a rigid, constricted state, forcing her heart to pump harder to push blood through the system. The solution for Eleanor was what I call nitric oxide dumping, which involves breaking up sedentary time with very short, frequent bouts of movement specifically designed to restore flow. We set a simple timer for her. Every hour that she sat knitting, she had to get up and walk for just 10 minutes, not fast, not sweating, just moving at a comfortable pace. This rhythm prevents the sludge effect in the circulation and keeps a steady baseline of nitric oxide production happening throughout the day, preventing that late afternoon creep in pressure. This is different from exercise, where you go to the gym for an hour and then sit the rest of the day. This is about activity management and keeping the machinery of your body humming. Even simple movements like marching in place while watching a commercial break or doing a lap around the kitchen island can be enough to reset the vessel tone. For seniors, this is often more effective than one intense workout because it addresses the stiffness that accumulates hour by hour. Within a week of this new routine, Eleanor's afternoon readings had stabilized, and she reported feeling more energetic and less foggy in her thinking as well. It turns out that the same flow that lowers blood pressure also improves oxygen delivery to the brain, helping with focus and mood. This is a strategy you can start immediately today. You don't need to change your clothes or drive anywhere, you just need to refuse to stay seated for more than 60 minutes at a time. For those with mobility challenges who cannot walk easily, even doing seated leg lifts or arm circles can help generate some of this beneficial shear stress. The goal is simply to demand blood flow from your heart, forcing the vessels to open up and accommodate that demand. This supports steadier readings and prevents the stiffening that leads to long-term hypertension damage. We are building a foundation here, moving from the mechanical structure of your vessels to the chemical balance of your blood, and now into the rhythm of your day. Each of these layers supports the others, creating a safety net that catches your blood pressure before it can spike. If you are finding these tips practical and easy to understand, please consider sharing this video with a friend or family member who might be struggling with their numbers. One more easy change is related to how you breathe, which is often the missing link for people who feel their blood pressure is tied to stress or anxiety. Many of us breathe shallowly into our chests without realizing it, keeping our bodies in a constant state of low-grade fight or flight. Thomas came to me convinced that his blood pressure monitor was broken because his readings were erratic, swinging wildly from normal to dangerously high within the span of a single afternoon. At 71, Thomas was a worrier. He watched the news constantly, worried about his finances, and worried about his health, creating a background hum of anxiety that he didn't even realize was there. He told me that whenever he sat down to take his pressure, he could feel his heart thumping in his chest, and he would try to force himself to relax, which ironically only made him more tense and drove the numbers up further. The mistake Thomas was making was trying to calm his mind to lower his blood pressure, which is incredibly difficult to do by sheer willpower, instead of using his body's physical mechanisms to force his nervous system to switch gears. He was stuck in a state of sympathetic dominance, the fight or flight mode, where his body was constantly primed for danger, keeping his blood vessels tight and his heart rate elevated even when he was sitting safely in his living room. The solution was not meditation, which he found frustrating, but a mechanical technique called resonance breathing, which directly hacks the communication line between the heart and the brain. We taught Thomas to breathe at a rate of exactly 6 breaths per minute, a specific rhythm that synchronizes the heart rate with the breath and maximizes what is called baroreflex sensitivity. This is the body's internal thermostat for blood pressure. As we age, this thermostat gets rusty and less responsive, but resonance breathing lubricates it, helping it react faster and more accurately to keep pressure stable. The technique is deceptively simple. You inhale through your nose for a count of 4 and then exhale through pursed lips like you are blowing out a candle slowly for a count of 6. By making the exhale longer than the inhale, Thomas was physically forcing his body to engage the parasympathetic nervous system, the rest and digest mode that naturally lowers heart rate and dilates blood vessels. He committed to doing this for just 5 minutes twice a day, usually before his morning measurement and again before dinner, and the results were almost immediate. Within a week, those wild swings in his blood pressure began to flatten out, and his baseline numbers dropped because his system was no longer fighting an imaginary tiger 24 hours a day. This supports steadier readings because it treats the root cause of stress-induced hypertension, which is an overactive nervous system, rather than just treating the symptom. It is a tool you can use anywhere, whether you are in a waiting room, stuck in traffic, or watching a tense movie, to instantly lower the hydraulic pressure in your arteries. Most older adults can try this safely, as it requires no equipment and puts zero strain on the body, yet it is one of the most powerful same-day levers we have. If you ever feel lightheaded while doing deep breathing, simply return to your normal breathing pattern for a few minutes. The goal is relaxation, not hyperventilation. Thomas found that eventually, this breathing pattern became his new normal response to stress, giving him a sense of control over his body that he hadn't felt in years. Linda, a 77-year-old retired teacher, presented a case that is incredibly common among seniors but rarely discussed openly due to embarrassment. She was drinking almost no water throughout the day, perhaps 2 small cups of tea and a few sips with meals, because she was terrified of having an accident or needing to rush to the bathroom constantly. Her blood pressure was stubbornly high, and she felt fatigued and sluggish, but she viewed her low fluid intake as a necessary compromise to manage her bladder issues. The problem was that, by keeping herself chronically dehydrated, Linda was making her blood thicker and more viscous, closer to the consistency of tomato sauce than water. When blood is thick, the heart has to pump with significantly more force to push it through the tiny capillaries of the body, which directly raises systolic blood pressure. Furthermore, when the body detects dehydration, it releases hormones like vasopressin that constrict the blood vessels to maintain pressure and hold on to every drop of water, creating a perfect storm for hypertension. We had to find a middle ground for Linda, a way to hydrate her vascular system without overwhelming her bladder, so we introduced a front-loading hydration strategy. This involved drinking the majority of her water early in the day, specifically 2 large glasses right after waking up and another large glass before noon, then tapering off in the late afternoon and evening. By hydrating heavily in the morning, she thinned her blood effectively for the active part of the day, but allowed her body to process the fluid well before bedtime, minimizing nighttime bathroom trips. We also added a pinch of electrolytes to her morning water, not the sugary sports drinks, but simple minerals like magnesium and potassium, which help the water get into the cells rather than just passing straight through the bladder. This is crucial for seniors because cellular hydration is different from just drinking water. Without the right minerals, water can just run right through you, which was one of Linda's fears. Once she started this protocol, her energy levels soared. Her skin looked less paper thin, and her blood pressure dropped by 10 points simply because her heart wasn't struggling to pump sludge. If you have been diagnosed with heart failure or kidney failure and are on a fluid-restricted diet prescribed by your doctor, you must follow their specific limits, as your body handles fluids differently. But for the average senior, the fear of incontinence often leads to dangerous dehydration that silently drives up stroke risk. Linda learned that a hydrated body is a healthier body, and with the right timing, she could protect her vessels and her dignity at the same time. Here is another simple habit that requires just a small adjustment to your grocery list, but pays off huge dividends. James was 69 and had always been a meat and potatoes man, skeptical of any food that looked too colorful or fancy, but he was looking for a natural booster to help his medication work better. He felt that despite his pills, his numbers were creeping up again, and he wanted to know if there was any truth to the superfood claims he saw on the internet. He didn't want to change his entire diet or become a vegan, but he was willing to add something if it was proven to work and didn't taste terrible. I introduced James to the red power foods, specifically beets and hibiscus tea, which are arguably the most potent edible tools for lowering blood pressure in existence. Beets are rich in dietary nitrates, which your body converts into nitric oxide, that same molecule we stimulated with the hand grip exercise, but this time we are delivering it chemically through digestion. Hibiscus, on the other hand, contains anthocyanins and other compounds that have been shown in studies to act somewhat like a mild ACE inhibitor, the same class of drugs used to treat hypertension. We started James on a simple routine: 1 glass of beet juice mixed with a little apple juice to mask the earthy taste in the morning, and 2 cups of tart hibiscus tea in the afternoon. He didn't have to give up his steak or his potatoes, he simply added these red drinks to his day, treating them like a prescription. The results were undeniable. Within 4 weeks, his systolic pressure had come down significantly, and his doctor was actually able to lower the dosage of one of his medications. For seniors, these foods are powerful because they work on the biochemistry of the vessel walls, helping them to relax even if they have become stiff with age. However, you must be consistent. This is not a one-time fix, but a daily dosing of natural nitrates to keep the levels high in your blood. You can eat roasted beets if you prefer, or even use a beetroot powder if you hate the taste, but the chemical effect remains the strongest with the raw juice or the tea. A note of caution is necessary here. If you are prone to kidney stones, you should be careful with beets as they are high in oxalates, and perhaps stick to the hibiscus tea instead. Also, because these foods are so effective at lowering blood pressure, if you are already on multiple medications, you need to monitor your numbers closely to ensure they don't drop too low, causing dizziness. James found that this was the easiest change he made because it required no effort other than drinking a tasty beverage, yet it gave him the edge his medication needed. One brief reinforcement sentence. This supports steadier readings by keeping a constant supply of vasodilator raw materials in your bloodstream. Patricia, at 66, woke up almost every morning with a dull headache and a feeling of being unrefreshed, no matter how early she went to bed. Her morning blood pressure readings were always the highest of the day, often starting at 150/90 before she had even had her coffee. She thought she was just a bad sleeper, but the reality was that her sleep quality was directly sabotaging her cardiovascular health through a mechanism she hadn't considered. Patricia was suffering from undiagnosed mild sleep apnea and was also sleeping flat on her back, a position that allows gravity to pull the airway tissues down, restricting oxygen flow. When you stop breathing or struggle for air at night, your oxygen levels drop and your brain panics, firing a surge of adrenaline to wake you up just enough to breathe. This adrenaline spike causes your blood pressure to surge while you sleep, preventing the natural dipping phenomenon where BP should drop by 10 to 20% overnight to give your heart a rest. Because Patricia's pressure never dipped at night, her heart was working a double shift, 24 hours a day, leading to those morning headaches and the dangerously high morning readings. We suggested 2 changes for her. First, to get a simple home sleep study to rule out severe apnea, and second, to train herself to sleep on her side using a body pillow. Side sleeping keeps the airway more open naturally, reducing the snoring and micro-waking events that trigger the adrenaline rushes. We also elevated the head of her bed slightly with a wedge pillow, which uses gravity to reduce the fluid accumulation in the neck area that can contribute to airway collapse. The change in her morning numbers was dramatic. Once she started sleeping on her side and treating the mild apnea, her morning systolic pressure dropped by 15 points because her heart finally got its nightly vacation. For seniors, the structure of the throat changes as muscles lose tone, making this issue incredibly common and often overlooked as just snoring. If you have a partner who tells you that you snore loudly or gasp for air, you owe it to your heart to get checked, as treating sleep apnea is often the single most effective cure for resistant hypertension. Even if you don't have apnea, simply avoiding the back sleeping position can reduce the workload on your heart significantly. Patricia realized that her high blood pressure was actually a symptom of bad sleep, and fixing the root cause changed her entire health trajectory. Most older adults can try this safely by using pillows to prop themselves into a comfortable side position, ensuring the hips and shoulders are supported. This supports steadier readings because it ensures your body enters the deep, restorative phases of sleep where blood pressure naturally resets. Here is part 3 of the script. It is designed to follow part 2 seamlessly, continuing the numbering from where we left off, item 9, and providing a comprehensive conclusion that ties the entire 3-part series together. Martha, a 73-year-old retired librarian, came to me complaining of terrible leg cramps at night that would wake her up in agony, leaving her tired and anxious the next day. She viewed these cramps as a nuisance separate from her high blood pressure, which had been creeping up steadily for years despite her medication. She didn't realize that the knot in her calf muscle and the tension in her arteries were actually 2 warning lights for the exact same nutritional deficiency. The mistake Martha was making, like millions of other seniors, was being unknowingly deficient in magnesium, the master mineral responsible for relaxation in the body. While calcium helps muscles and blood vessels contract, magnesium is the chemical key that allows them to release and relax. Without enough of it, your body remains in a state of permanent low-grade constriction. For an older adult, this deficiency is dangerous because common blood pressure medications, specifically diuretics, actively deplete magnesium stores, creating a vicious cycle where the treatment for high blood pressure actually removes the mineral needed to keep blood pressure low. We address this by changing Martha's evening routine to include a magnesium-rich meal and a specific transdermal application, because digestion of pills can be difficult for seniors with lower stomach acid. We added pumpkin seeds and spinach to her diet, but the game changer was using a high-quality magnesium oil spray on her legs before bed. This allowed the mineral to bypass her digestive system and absorb directly into the tissues, calming her restless legs and, by extension, relaxing her systemic vascular resistance while she slept. Within 2 weeks, the night cramps had vanished, which was a relief, but the bigger surprise for Martha was that her morning blood pressure readings had dropped by 8 points. Her vessels were finally getting the signal to let go, allowing blood to flow with less resistance. This supports steadier readings because it restores the chemical balance required for arterial flexibility. If you have kidney issues, always check with your doctor before adding magnesium supplements, but for most, increasing magnesium-rich foods is a safe and essential strategy. Albert was an 80-year-old gentleman who prided himself on staying indoors where it was safe and climate-controlled, avoiding the harsh sun and the risk of falls on uneven pavement. He looked pale and frail, and his blood pressure was stubbornly high despite him being on a strict low-salt diet and taking his pills religiously. Albert didn't understand that by hiding from the sun, he was starving his body of a hormone that acts as a natural blood pressure regulator. The issue was a severe vitamin D deficiency, which is rampant in the senior population because aging skin becomes less efficient at converting sunlight into vitamin D, and we tend to spend more time indoors. Vitamin D is not just a vitamin for strong bones. It is actually a potent hormone that suppresses the production of renin, an enzyme in the kidneys that constricts blood vessels and raises blood pressure. By staying inside, Albert's renin levels were running unchecked, keeping his blood pressure artificially elevated no matter what he ate. We couldn't ask Albert to sunbathe for hours, so we took a dual approach. A clinically appropriate vitamin D3 supplement paired with K2 to ensure calcium went to his bones and not his arteries, and a morning light routine. We asked him to simply sit on his porch for 15 minutes every morning with his sleeves rolled up, exposing his skin to natural light without burning. This combination signaled his body that it was daytime, regulating his circadian rhythm and suppressing that kidney enzyme that was causing the constriction. The change took about a month to show fully, but eventually his blood pressure stabilized at a much safer level, and he reported feeling stronger and less fragile. It turns out that the sun is not the enemy. It is an ancient partner in our health that we cannot simply divorce without consequences. This supports steadier readings by targeting the hormonal root of vasoconstriction. Most older adults can try this safely, provided they monitor their skin and avoid the peak burning hours of midday. Henry, 68, was a man who carried a lot of tension in his neck and shoulders, constantly shrugging them up toward his ears without even realizing it. He told me his blood pressure always spiked when he was stressed, which was often, and he felt like he had no way to switch off the worry. He tried meditation, but found his mind wandering, and he felt like he was failing at relaxing, which only made him more stressed. The breakthrough for Henry came when we stopped trying to fix his mind and started working on his vagus nerve, the longest nerve in the body that connects your brain to your heart and gut. This nerve is the brake pedal for your stress response, and in many seniors, it becomes dormant or low tone due to chronic stress and posture issues. We taught Henry a physical technique to manually stimulate this nerve, specifically using ear massage and humming. The vagus nerve has a branch that surfaces in the ear, so gently massaging the hollow part of the ear, and the area behind the earlobe can send a direct signal to the brain to lower heart rate and blood pressure. We paired this with humming, asking Henry to hum a low, vibrating tune for 5 minutes while he sat in his chair. The vibration of the vocal cords stimulates the vagus nerve physically, forcing the body out of fight or flight and into rest and digest almost instantly. Henry felt silly doing it at first, but he couldn't deny the physical wave of calm that washed over him after just a few minutes of humming and ear massage. His post-stress blood pressure spikes became less frequent and less severe because he now had a physical off switch he could press any time he felt the tension rising. This supports steadier readings by mechanically engaging the body's own relaxation pathways. You can do this at home, in the car, or anywhere you have a moment of privacy, and it costs absolutely nothing. Alice, 70, lived in a bustling neighborhood and slept with the television on because she said the silence made her feel lonely. She didn't think twice about the noise, but her blood pressure was mysteriously higher in the mornings than in the evenings, a pattern that usually suggests a sleep issue. She was suffering from what we call noise pollution hypertension, a very real phenomenon where the brain processes sound even while asleep, triggering micro-stress responses all night long. The mistake Alice made was assuming that because she was asleep, her ears were off, but the primitive part of the brain never stops listening for danger. Every time a car honked outside or the volume on the TV flared up, her cortisol spiked and her blood pressure surged, preventing her heart from getting its required nightly rest. She was effectively running a marathon in her sleep, waking up exhausted and with vascular tension that set the tone for the entire day. We implemented a sound hygiene protocol for Alice, which didn't mean total silence, but rather controlled, consistent sound. We replaced the flickering, unpredictable noise of the TV with a white noise machine set to a deep, consistent brown noise frequency that masks outside sounds without startling the brain. We also encouraged her to wear soft, comfortable earplugs if the street noise was particularly bad on weekends. The effect was subtle at first, but after a week, Alice noticed she was waking up without that racing heart feeling she had grown accustomed to. Her morning blood pressure dropped because her nervous system had finally been allowed to fully power down for 8 hours straight. This supports steadier readings by removing the invisible environmental triggers that keep you on high alert. Here is another simple habit that requires no effort other than pressing a button before you close your eyes. David, 75, had noticed that his ankles were often swollen by the end of the day, a condition he dismissed as just getting old. He didn't connect his puffy ankles to his high blood pressure, but they were intimately related through the mechanics of fluid dynamics. When fluid pools in the lower extremities, it creates a stagnant back pressure in the circulatory system, forcing the heart to pump harder to circulate blood against that resistance. David's mistake was fighting gravity all day long without ever giving his circulatory system a helping hand. He spent his days sitting or standing, and his aging veins, which have valves to push blood back up to the heart, were struggling to keep up. This venous insufficiency meant his effective blood volume was trapped in his legs, causing both the swelling and the compensatory rise in blood pressure. The solution was a mechanical one: legs up the wall or simple leg elevation. We instructed David to lie flat on his bed or a yoga mat and prop his legs up on the wall or a stack of pillows for just 15 minutes every afternoon. This position uses gravity to drain the pooled fluid and blood out of the legs and back towards the heart and kidneys, where it can be properly filtered and processed. It was a relief for David physically, taking the pressure off his heavy legs, but it also acted as a reset for his blood pressure. By returning that pooled blood to circulation in a controlled way, his body could regulate the volume better, and his heart didn't have to work as hard to move fluid from his feet. This supports steadier readings by physically assisting the return of blood flow. Most older adults can try this safely, but if you have heart failure, check with your doctor first, as the sudden return of fluid can sometimes be too much for a weak heart. Grace, 79, was a widow who lived alone and felt a deep, aching sense of isolation, though she rarely complained about it. She ate well, walked daily, and took her meds, yet her blood pressure remained stubbornly high, a biological reflection of her emotional state. She didn't realize that loneliness acts on the body exactly like a physical threat, keeping the vascular system constricted and the stress hormones elevated chronically. The mistake society makes is treating blood pressure purely as a plumbing problem, ignoring that the heart is also an emotional organ. Grace's lack of meaningful social connection meant she was constantly in a state of hypervigilance, a survival mechanism where the body braces itself because there is no tribe to protect it. This emotional bracing translates directly into arterial stiffness. We prescribed social connection for Grace, not just casual chat, but meaningful engagement. She joined a local reading group that met twice a week and started volunteering at a shelter to walk dogs. The act of connecting with others and feeling useful released oxytocin, the bonding hormone, which is a powerful natural antidote to cortisol and a direct vasodilator. It wasn't an overnight fix, but over 3 months, as Grace's calendar filled up, her blood pressure numbers went down. She was no longer chemically bracing against the world, she was engaging with it, and her blood vessels relaxed in response. This supports steadier readings by treating the emotional root of physical tension. One brief reinforcement sentence: your heart needs connection just as much as it needs potassium. We have now covered 14 powerful natural levers to lower your blood pressure, ranging from the mechanical to the chemical and finally to the emotional. It is easy to feel overwhelmed by such a long list, so I want to bring you back to the core principle of this video: the order matters. You do not need to do all 14 of these things tomorrow. In fact, trying to do so would likely cause stress that raises your pressure. Start with the foundation we built in Part 1, accurate measurement. You cannot manage what you do not measure correctly, so fix your home testing environment first. Once you trust your numbers, move to the simple mechanical levers like the isometric hand grip training or the leg elevation. These give you quick wins and prove to your brain that you have control over your own physiology. Then, layer in the chemical support from Part 2 and 3. Adjust your hydration timing, add the potassium-rich foods, and introduce the red power of beets or hibiscus. These changes work in the background, constantly nudging your blood pressure down while you go about your day. Finally, address the silent stressors: the sleep position, the noise pollution, and the emotional connection. Remember the stories of George, Arthur, Margaret, and all the others we discussed. They were not superhumans. They were seniors just like you who felt stuck and frustrated until they found the specific key that unlocked their body's ability to heal. Your high blood pressure is not a life sentence, and it is not just part of aging that you have to accept helplessly. It is a signal that something in your lifestyle, your movement, your diet, your environment, or your stress needs adjustment. By listening to that signal and applying these targeted, senior-friendly tools, you can lower your numbers, protect your brain and kidneys, and reclaim the energy to enjoy these golden years. If you know someone over 50 who could benefit from this comprehensive guide, please share this video with them and subscribe for more simple, science-backed blood pressure tips.